I played Fallout 76's new Brotherhood of Steel DLC that was Steel Dawn a bit early, and in this video I want to give you guys some of my first impressions on it. Now this wasn't early due to it being some kind of influencer event, but rather right now it's up on the Fallout 76 public test server on PC. So anybody who owns the game on Bethesda.net can download it and experience this. It actually kicked off to a bit of a rocky start. It was released late last Thursday, but there was actually a bug on the second quest, so you couldn't really progress all that far. That was supposed to be fixed by update earlier in the week. That update didn't actually fix the bug, but then earlier yesterday the bug was finally fixed and people could start progressing and actually playing what looks like nearly all of Steel Dawn. After playing nearly all of the new content on the public test server, I really just want to give my first impressions, not a full-scale review or anything like that, but after spending a few hours in this new DLC, what I walked away with, as well as a brief overview for you as to what you can expect from it. And in this video I will not be going through major spoilers. I'm going to show off some gameplay from just some of the early quests, but I'm not going to spoil some of the ways this story goes. What I will talk about is how long it is, how many quests there are, and the overall impact it has in the world. And of course, it is important to keep in mind, this is on a public test server. The update right now still has a month and a half before it's slated for release. We don't actually have a concrete release date, so a lot of this is subject to change. For that reason, I am not going to be talking about bugs or really voice acting quality, because a lot of that could change between now and release. Earlier in the year, Bethesda described how they're planning to combine the two Brotherhood of Steel DLC quest lines into one. So instead of there being Steel Dawn and Fractured Steel, you would just have Steel Dawn, and hypothetically that's what we just played. But either Steel Dawn off the bat was very small, or they didn't fully combine these two, and some parts were kind of held into a part 1, part 2 system. So in this quest line, what you're going to see is the introduction to the Brotherhood of Steel in Appalachia. And with this comes a difference in ideals. Literally in the very first scene, in the very first quest of this one, you see two members of the Brotherhood of Steel arguing with one another, and that kind of conflict is introduced right off the bat and then explored further through almost every quest. These two will butt heads consistently, and there's a lot of dialogue or discussion on it until it comes to more of a breaking point. The first few quests of this one involve helping the Brotherhood of Steel in their newfound home, that being of course Appalachia and Fort Atlas. I really just feel like in many ways this is almost a build-off or a continuation of Wastelanders and the factions introduced with that. Some of the early interactions you'll have on behalf or even with the Brotherhood of Steel have to do with the raiders and the settlers, sometimes being members of those factions actually coming to the base and trying to decide if they should be recruited or not, or some larger quests that are more dedicated to those two new factions which actually have new areas within them. And really, I think Bethesda did a good job with the first few quests of showcasing how people in the area feel about the Brotherhood. Some like them, some really don't like them, but also the ideals of this Brotherhood of Steel and how some members feel one way and some others feel another way, and how this Brotherhood of Steel is slightly different than other ones we've seen in other Fallout games. The second half of the quest get a bit more serious. I could see this hypothetically being the cutoff point where Steel Dawn would have ended, and the second half of quests will help the Brotherhood of Steel fixing some problems they've created, and you get to go around the region a bit more overall. I don't want to give a full review now, but it's definitely the second half of these quests that are a lot more interesting and things start to spice up. And I would really describe Steel Dawn overall as a Wastelanders light. If you played Wastelanders, this is going to be very much so more of the same, except with different people, a different faction overall. And I say that because it basically follows the same formula of Wastelanders. NPCs with dialogue are very similar. You'll have the occasional joke, occasional speech check. At many points, you could either just kind of cut to the chase, or you could go a bit more in depth, asking a lot of questions, getting lore and backstory. But if you don't want that, you could kind of ignore it. And it was a similar balance of combat to talking or interactions. And like Wastelanders, there are definitely benefits to completing the older content, except with Steel Dawn, it is Wastelanders content. At one point, I could pass a speech check because I raided the vault with some of those raiders in Wastelanders earlier on in the character. But that said, it doesn't really do anything new. I wouldn't say there are any new innovations on the dialogue system or really gameplay loop here. It's more or less Wastelanders, but new stories and new experiences with different characters. And one of the downsides of that is it takes a similar approach to choices. There are without a doubt choices during Steel Dawn, it just didn't really matter, or at least you don't really see some of the big impacts of making a decision one way or the other for right now. The decision might be hard, trying to decide if it should be this person or that person, and there's ways to consider all the details, but it's not like the choice one way or another has a huge impact. And some of the humor was definitely nice. One of the early quests involves going to a settlement that needs our help. Although I would say one of the things this lacks from Wastelanders is the dramatic world overhaul, but that's kind of to be expected. I don't know if that's really a negative. This does update the world of Fallout 76, but of course nothing's going to be as big as the introduction introduction of human NPCs and a ton of new locations getting NPCs. In this, we see several locations that are either totally new, revamped for this update, so basically being totally new, but it has the same name or occupies an older location. Certain places actually got additional interiors or little side entrances like Foundation and Crater, and then sometimes there are new inhabitants at old locations, so it kind of fills up the world a bit more, which is definitely nice. It's just not nearly on the same scale of Wastelanders. There's only a handful of new locations to explore and experience thus far. But it's not to say there's not a healthy amount of new stuff. Many of the Brotherhood of Steel members you interact with will have new and custom armor, whether it be a new paint job or just totally new armor overall, and that definitely did a good job at giving them their own identity and feel. Sometimes it was familiar stuff we've seen in past games, but when that new stuff came out, it was pretty cool. It definitely reminds you this is at a different time than some of those other Brotherhood of Steel interactions, and you'll get some new content by completing the quests, whether it be unlocking new unique weapons, some camp items can be unlocked, and even a few new armors along the way. The new weapon integration here will definitely frustrate people though. By completing certain quests, you'll just get a new weapon, like there's a new rocket launcher, so you'll just get that from a quest, but one, you don't actually earn the plan for it, and two, it's non-legendary. All of those unique legendary weapons you get are for already released weapons, none of the new ones with this update. And if you're playing Fallout 76 on a higher level character, you'll probably know a non-legendary weapon is basically useless. So the way you'll gain access to the new weapons and armor added in with Steel Dawn, that being a new pistol, a new sword, a new rocket launcher, as well as a new full armor set, is by completing daily ops. When you complete a daily ops, you have a random chance at getting a rare reward, and if you are lucky, you'll happen to get the plan for one of these. This is going to be very frustrating because it's just picking from the overall list. All of these are getting added to the overall list of rare rewards, so there's no real concrete or easy way to unlock them. Even further, once you actually unlock one of these weapons, you still have to actually have a legendary enemy or the purveyor drop a legendary variant for you. As of right now, there's no crafting, and for that reason, I can't really give huge impressions on them because I just have these little pea shooters that don't do much damage. They definitely look cool. The animations are pretty solid. Some of them are definitely unfinished, but I would say overall, the identity of these weapons is pretty interesting, and I'm excited to get some good legendary variants, but that might take a very, very long time. And there's already some discussion in the community about the implementation of this, so we could even see some changes before this releases. But speaking of weapons and combat, one of the other big things you feel in Steel Dawn is the post One Wasteland update. In that, as you're doing some of these quests, you'll just have really tough enemies because everything is scaled to your level as with One Wasteland. And I think you feel it more here because you're trying to do story content. So at points, I just kind of wanted to finish the quest. I had to go take down some miscellaneous enemies, or of course, bad guys would come out and you'd have to kill them to progress. Except now when all of the bad guys are like level 100, that does make things quite a bit more difficult. And I think because I was trying to complete story content and wasn't focusing as much on some of that combat, this definitely at points got frustrating because you would die, have to run all the way back through a tunnel or wherever you were as you respawned, and the enemies just in general are pretty tough. It doesn't help that right now on the public test server, many legacy items got a nerf. So for example, that flamer I typically use in my videos is kind of a pea shooter now, but either way, the One Wasteland changes are definitely felt during Steel Dawn, and at first was a bit jarring. But speaking broadly, as far as the size and scale of the questing experience directly in Steel Dawn, it seems like it's going to be a 8 quest and roughly 3 to 4 hour experience. This is going to vary greatly if you're on a new character or an old one, although I think many people should be on an older character for this one. There's not really a ton of incentive to start off totally new, and if anything, I would say actually having a character that completed Wastelanders already would be pretty beneficial, but depending on how in depth you go talking to some of the NPCs, or if you have to run from one location to another and can't fast travel, of course that number will vary drastically. But I did spend quite a bit of time talking to NPCs. Many times I did ask nearly every question offered. So when you see 3 to 4 hours, don't think I try to rush this as quick as possible. I think even if you try to stretch this out as long as possible, you wouldn't get a time that much longer than that. So without a doubt is a much smaller scale than Wastelanders, and they have said that, but the interesting part about Steel Dawn is it's really not a complete story. The story ends on a bit of a cliffhanger. You make a big decision, then there's a big fight, and then it just kind of is done. You could talk to some of the various characters who will have new and additional dialogue in that kind of epilogue, but it feels like we have like 1/3 of a story. Like this is part 1 of maybe a 3-part or even 2-part overall quest. We just don't have the rest released currently in the game yet, and based off what we have, based on Bethesda saying this is Steel Dawn, it looks like this is everything. I mean, hypothetically, they could have just forgot the last few quests, but it doesn't seem that way. That's not to say it doesn't end on a solid point or there is a definitive ending point. It's just clearly there's more. There's some characters where you just have have one brief interaction, but it definitely seems like they'll play a larger role down the road. But really, this is an introduction to the faction, then you start to get into some of the more serious quests, make a big choice, and then it's kind of the end. You don't really see the outcome of the choice you made, at least thus far, but you definitely will probably feel it in subsequent quests whenever they add those. And it's definitely a compelling first entry. I think a lot of people will enjoy this one. I would say the story overall is probably worse than Wastelanders, but I think a big part of that is, again, it doesn't really feel like a complete story, and I don't think it's actually supposed to be the complete story. So it's like trying to review the first half of a book where you don't necessarily know where it'll go in the end, but without a doubt feels like a solid start. I am ingrained in the Brotherhood of Steel. I want to know more about where they take this and what kind of challenges they face in the future. But now we do enter into an interesting time point where it is clearly a part 1 of 2, but we have no idea when part 2 is coming. Probably at some point in 2021, but January, February, or is this more of a March, April, or even summer 2021 release? Because that would be weird if you play all of this now at the end of 2020, but have to wait 4 or 5 months to get the rest of it. Either way though, if you're looking forward to Steel Dawn, I would still stay excited. The story quests themselves will definitely entertain you, and especially towards the end, you do have some pretty interesting and memorable experiences overall. As far as the larger impact this has on the game, as well as some of the other new features coming with the update, we'll have to see those in another video. There's a lot more to explore with this one. Again, some of the buffs, nerfs, or just overall changes to damage and weapons. But either way, those are my first impressions. Hopefully you guys found this one informative. It's definitely one to play more on. There's a lot more content to kind of look into and try and unlock. But until next time, I thank you all for watching again, and I hope to see you all later.
Now that that's over with, let me take a look at what you've collected. The pressure gauge looks like it's in good condition. The core processor